Imagine waking up on a normal day, in your own home, when suddenly you discover something that will change forever the way you see the people around you. A secret, hidden for years, is about to be revealed. What would you do if, as you turned the corner of your life, the truth was more terrifying than you could have ever imagined? Everything seemed normal. But now, one simple mistake could cost someone their life. And it's not just anyone, it's someone you'd never expect. By the end of this story, everything you thought you knew about trust and loyalty will be turned upside down. Stay with us until the end to find out how this secret, which no one wanted to reveal, will explode into a truth that could destroy everything. Welcome to another astonishing story. If you're ready to dive into this chilling mystery, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We need your support to keep bringing you more jaw-dropping content. Don't forget to like this video and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our latest updates. Now, let's get back to the mystery that awaits. In the small, seemingly quiet town of Oakwood, Paul Thompson was a man who had worked hard for everything he had. A successful businessman with a solid reputation, his life was built on trust and integrity. But everything changed the day he discovered the betrayal that would unravel his world. It all started with a late-night phone call from an anonymous source, someone who knew too much about his life. The voice on the other end spoke calmly but with a chilling confidence. "Your partner, Robert, isn't who you think he is," the voice said, sending a shiver down Paul's spine. At first, Paul dismissed it as a prank or a misunderstanding, but as days passed, strange things began happening. Robert, his trusted business partner for over a decade, started acting erratically, showing signs of nervousness and avoiding eye contact. Paul's gut told him something was wrong, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. When a confidential email leaked from their company, revealing sensitive financial data to a competitor, Paul knew that the unthinkable was happening. Robert had betrayed him. Determined to confront his partner and uncover the truth, Paul felt a cold rage build inside him. He had built his empire on loyalty and trust, and now it was all crumbling. As he prepared for the confrontation, his mind raced with questions. How long had Robert been plotting behind his back? What had he gained from this treachery? The weight of the betrayal hung heavy on Paul's chest, but he couldn't afford to wait any longer. This had to end, and it had to end now. Little did Paul know, the conspiracy ran far deeper than he could ever imagine, and this was only the beginning of a twisted journey that would test everything he thought he knew about loyalty, trust, and justice. Linda, Paul's wife, had always been the calm in his storm. Where he was driven by ambition and success, she grounded him with her warmth and unwavering support. But even Linda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over their home in recent days. Paul had become distant, withdrawn, consumed by the mysterious phone call and his growing distrust of Robert. Linda tried to keep things normal for the sake of their family, but something in Paul's eyes told her he was spiraling. One night, as Paul sat alone in his study, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop, Linda walked in quietly. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but as she caught a glimpse of the screen, her heart sank. The words betrayal and Robert were highlighted in bold red letters. She hadn't expected to see such an explosive term on Paul's screen, but it all made sense now. She had always known Paul's bond with Robert ran deeper than business. It was personal. They were friends, brothers in arms, and now that bond had been shattered. Linda, with her years of experience reading Paul's moods, knew that he wouldn't rest until he had answers. She could see the storm brewing inside him. When Paul finally turned to her and explained the gravity of the situation, Linda didn't know what to say. She was as shocked as he was, but one thing was certain, she couldn't stand idly by. This was no longer just a business matter, it was a fight for their future. As Paul's anger and confusion grew, Linda made a choice. She would stand by him, not just as his wife, but as a partner in this battle for truth. Together, They would uncover Robert's secrets, even if it meant risking everything they had. The following days were a whirlwind of investigation, secrecy, and mounting tension. Paul and Linda found themselves in a race against time, trying to piece together the puzzle of Robert's betrayal. Late nights spent going through files, tracing financial transactions, and cross-referencing everything with their business partners had only confirmed their worst fears. Robert had been siphoning off large sums of money from their accounts and funneling it into a network of shady enterprises. But the financial fraud was only the tip of the iceberg. As Paul dug deeper, he uncovered something far darker, a conspiracy involving not just Robert, but several key players in their business and personal lives. There were whispers of illegal dealings, bribery, and even connections to criminal organizations. The more Paul uncovered, the more he realized how far-reaching this web of deceit went. Robert had used his position of trust not only to enrich himself but to entangle Paul and Linda in a dangerous game they hadn't even known they were part of. As they worked together to uncover more, Linda's suspicions about Robert's true intentions began to take shape. It wasn't just money that motivated him, it was power. Power that he was willing to destroy everything for, including Paul. With each new revelation, the couple's sense of security and safety eroded. What started as a betrayal within their business had turned into something much more sinister. They weren't just dealing with a crooked partner, they were facing a conspiracy that threatened to consume them both. The danger was real, and with every passing moment, the stakes grew higher. Paul realized that in order to truly expose Robert and the others, he would need to outsmart them at their own game. And that meant becoming something he never thought he'd be, someone willing to break the law, to fight fire with fire. It was the night before Paul and Linda planned to confront Robert, and neither of them could sleep. The tension in their home was palpable, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on them both. Linda sat by the window, staring out into the darkened streets of Oakwood, lost in thought. She had been through so much in their marriage, but nothing had ever felt this precarious. Paul had always been the protector, the one with a plan, but now he was a man on the edge. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was consumed by the need for revenge. And in that moment, Linda knew that they were no longer just fighting for their business, they were fighting for their lives. The plan was simple, or so it seemed. They would meet Robert at his office under the guise of discussing business matters. But Linda knew that things would never be the same once they confronted him. She had seen how Paul had changed since the discovery. He was no longer the man she married. He was someone desperate to reclaim control over his life, to right the wrongs done to him. Paul, on the other hand, had little regard for the consequences anymore. The only thing that mattered was exposing Robert and taking back what was his. They had spent weeks gathering evidence, preparing for this moment. But even with all their preparations, nothing could prepare them for the storm that was about to break. As they walked into Robert's office, the door closing behind them with a sharp click, Paul's heart raced. He wasn't sure what to expect. Would Robert deny everything? Would he confess, or worse, retaliate? The silence in the room felt like a pressure cooker, each second ticking by louder than the last. When Robert finally looked up from his desk, his face pale and his eyes full of something that wasn't guilt, Paul knew that this would be no ordinary conversation. Robert's smile was cold, calculated. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice steady despite the tension. Paul couldn't believe the audacity of the man standing in front of him. This wasn't just a business partner, it was a predator, one who had been playing a game with their lives. The confrontation was about to begin, and nothing could stop it now. The confrontation with Robert had been everything Paul had feared and more. Robert, cold and unrepentant, had revealed more than just a betrayal. It was as if he had been playing a much deeper game, one that involved not only money but influence, power, and manipulation at the highest levels. After their meeting, Paul and Linda were left with a chilling realization: Robert wasn't acting alone. He had been working with a group of influential figures who had embedded themselves deep within their business. As Paul pieced together the fragments of their conversation, it became evident that Robert had been positioning himself for a power grab, one that had been years in the making. The betrayal had never been just about personal gain, it had been about securing an empire, one built on lies and deceit. Over the following days, as Paul and Linda dug deeper into the extent of Robert's manipulation, they began to realize the gravity of their situation. They were no longer just fighting for their company, they were fighting for their lives. Robert had planted false information, misled investors, and manipulated the media. He had positioned himself as the savior of the business, a man who had come to protect it from external threats when, in reality, he was the one pulling the strings behind the scenes. Every move they made seemed to play into his hands, as if he had anticipated every possible outcome. The sense of paranoia was overwhelming, and they had to tread carefully, for even the slightest misstep could result in complete destruction. As the walls closed in, Paul realized that they were in too deep to simply walk away. The game had changed, and they had no choice but to keep playing, even if it meant risking everything. The days following their confrontation with Robert were filled with uncertainty and anxiety. Despite their best efforts to gather evidence and fight back, Paul and Linda knew that the odds were stacked against them. Every step forward felt like it was met with 2 steps back. Robert had been anticipating their every move, and they found themselves outwitted at every turn. The truth was, Robert had prepared for this moment long before Paul ever suspected anything. He had covered his tracks meticulously, leaving no room for error. For the first time in their lives, Paul and Linda were in a battle they couldn't win on their own. The weight of the situation bore down on them, and sleep became a luxury they could no longer afford. Paul spent long nights staring at the ceiling, his mind racing with possibilities. He tried to find a way out of the mess they were in, but every solution seemed to come with its own set of consequences. Every strategy he devised seemed to lead to even more complications, and he began to feel the suffocating grip of helplessness closing in. Linda, too, was struggling with the overwhelming pressure. She had always been the emotional anchor for their family, but now, she found herself questioning everything. Could they truly win against someone as ruthless and prepared as Robert? The sleepless nights wore on, and the fatigue began to take its toll. They were running on empty, but neither of them could afford to stop. As the pressure continued to mount, they both realized that they couldn't let Robert win, not just for their business, but for the future of their family. They had to keep fighting, even if it meant sacrificing everything. The breaking point came when Paul received a call late one evening from an unexpected source, his old friend, Detective Ethan Carver. Ethan had been a loyal ally for years, someone Paul trusted implicitly. But when the detective spoke, his voice was full of urgency and unease. "Paul, you need to listen to me. There's more going on here than you realize. Robert's not just after your company, he's involved in something much bigger." The words hit Paul like a thunderclap. For weeks, he had been focused solely on Robert and his betrayal, but now he realized that the web of lies stretched far beyond what he had imagined. Ethan revealed that Robert had connections to several criminal enterprises, including money laundering and organized crime. What had begun as a personal betrayal was now part of a much darker conspiracy. The detective urged Paul to be cautious, warning him that getting too close to the truth could cost him everything. Despite the warnings, Paul knew that he couldn't back down. He was already too far in. With Linda by his side, they decided to take the risk, diving deeper into Robert's criminal dealings. But as they uncovered more, the danger grew. They found themselves drawn into a world they didn't understand, a world where power and corruption ruled everything. They were no longer fighting for just their business, they were fighting for their survival. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, Paul and Linda began to realize that Robert wasn't just trying to destroy them, he was trying to make them disappear, erasing them from the picture entirely. The stakes had never been higher, and with each passing day, it felt like they were teetering on the edge of a cliff. With the threat of Robert and his criminal connections looming over them, Paul and Linda were left with few options. They had no choice but to make a desperate move. After careful consideration, Paul reached out to a powerful ally from his past, someone who had the resources and influence to help them take down Robert once and for all. It wasn't an easy decision, but Paul knew that in order to win, they would need more than just evidence. They would need leverage, and this ally could provide them with just that. The plan was risky, and the consequences were far-reaching, but Paul had run out of time. Robert was closing in, and they couldn't afford to wait any longer. As Paul and Linda met with their ally, they laid out their strategy. It involved turning the tables on Robert, using his own weaknesses against him. But as the plan began to take shape, Paul realized how far they had come from the people they once were. They had become players in a game that required ruthless tactics, and there was no going back. The decision to pursue this route wasn't one Paul took lightly, but he knew that if they didn't act quickly, Robert would continue to tighten his grip on their lives. With everything on the line, Paul and Linda prepared for the most dangerous gamble of their lives. The final showdown was fast approaching, and only one side would emerge victorious. But as they moved forward with the plan, they couldn't help but wonder, would they make it out alive? As Paul and Linda set their plan in motion, the first steps felt like they were walking into a storm. Their ally, a seasoned former corporate strategist named Richard Monroe, had set up a series of meetings with key players in Robert's network. Monroe was a man of few words, his presence commanding respect without him ever needing to raise his voice. He had connections within the world of high finance, law enforcement, and even the underground world of information brokers. His expertise was invaluable, but it came at a price. As they dug deeper into Robert's dealings, the enormity of his influence became evident. It wasn't just about business and money, it was about control. Robert had built a network of people who were loyal to him, not out of admiration, but out of fear. The more Paul and Linda uncovered, the more they realized how far-reaching Robert's network was. But what shook them to their core was the discovery of an even darker secret. Robert was involved in a massive conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government. It wasn't just about ruining their company, it was about manipulating entire systems for profit and power. As the truth began to unfold, Paul felt a heavy weight settle on his shoulders. The fight was no longer just about saving their lives, it was about exposing a corrupt system that had been operating in the shadows for years. But the deeper they went, the more dangerous their situation became. It wasn't just Robert they had to worry about anymore, it was the people who would stop at nothing to protect him. In the days that followed, Paul found himself questioning the trustworthiness of everyone around him. Richard Monroe, while invaluable in their pursuit of Robert, had always been a bit of an enigma. He wasn't someone Paul had ever fully trusted, but he was the only ally they had. However, when they received an encrypted message from an anonymous source, everything changed. The message revealed that Richard had been feeding information to Robert all along. It was a betrayal within the betrayal, and it cut deeper than anything Paul had experienced before. The shock was almost paralyzing. How could Monroe, the one person who had been guiding them, turn out to be a double agent? As the layers of deceit peeled away, Paul realized that Monroe had never truly been on their side. He had been playing both ends against the middle, ensuring that no matter who won, he would come out on top. His involvement in Robert's conspiracy was more than just financial, it was personal. He had his own reasons for working with Robert, reasons that went beyond money. As the betrayal became clear, Paul and Linda were left with few options. They had no one to turn to, no more allies to trust. Every step they took seemed to lead them into a deeper web of lies. They were alone, and with Richard's betrayal, the path to Robert's downfall seemed more impossible than ever. With the revelation of Monroe's betrayal, Paul and Linda were forced to make a difficult choice. They could no longer rely on external help. They would have to take matters into their own hands. The risk was enormous, but the stakes had never been higher. They were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting to expose a vast network of corruption that had ensnared everything they cared about. In the final stages of their plan, Paul and Linda began to gather the evidence they needed to bring Robert and his associates down. They worked tirelessly, digging through mountains of documents, making covert calls, and even infiltrating the very circles that Robert had built his empire on. It was a dangerous game, one that required them to push the boundaries of what they were willing to risk. They had no backup, no safety net, just their wits, their resolve, and their desire for justice. Every moment felt like a countdown, as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation with Robert. Paul knew that once they pulled the trigger, there would be no turning back. It would be a fight to the finish, and only one side would survive. As the final showdown loomed, they found themselves questioning everything they had done to get to this point. Was it worth it? Had they sacrificed too much? But there was no time for doubt. The endgame was upon them, and they had no choice but to see it through. The night of the final showdown arrived, and with it, the culmination of everything Paul and Linda had fought for. Their plan had been set into motion, and the pieces were falling into place. They had gathered the evidence, exposed the key players, and now all that was left was to confront Robert. The confrontation took place in the very heart of Robert's operation, a sleek, high-rise building that had once symbolized his empire of power and influence. As Paul and Linda entered the building, they knew there would be no turning back. Robert had been prepared for this moment. He had known it was coming, and yet, he hadn't anticipated the sheer determination of the people he had underestimated. The tension was palpable as they faced off in the boardroom, the very place where Robert had orchestrated his empire. But this time, it was Paul and Linda who held the power. The truth had been revealed, the lies had been exposed, and Robert's empire was crumbling around him. The confrontation was intense, a battle of wits and willpower. Robert fought back, using every trick in the book to try and regain control, but it was too late. The truth had already been laid bare, and there was no escaping the consequences. In the end, it was the fall of Robert that marked the end of a dark chapter in Paul and Linda's lives. The empire he had built came crashing down, and with it, the lies that had kept him on top. But even as Robert was taken away, Paul and Linda knew that their victory came at a cost. The battle had been won, but the scars of the war would remain. In the days that followed Robert's arrest, Paul and Linda found themselves grappling with the weight of their victory. The world around them had changed, Robert's empire had collapsed, but the consequences of his actions were far-reaching. The corruption that had been embedded in the very fabric of society wasn't something that could be undone overnight. It would take years to rebuild the damage he had done, and even longer to heal the wounds that had been inflicted on those caught in his web. For Paul, the battle had taken its toll. The constant stress, the betrayals, the danger, it all left scars that wouldn't fade quickly. He had won, yes, but at what cost? The people who had stood by him, Linda, Richard, and even those he barely trusted, had been through a hell of their own. And while Robert's fall had been sweet, it felt hollow, like the satisfaction of winning a war but losing the peace that followed. Linda, too, struggled with the aftermath. She had always been a rock, a pillar of strength, but now she found herself wondering if it had all been worth it. The truth they had uncovered, the secrets they had exposed, it was more than just a victory. It was a reminder of how fragile everything could be, how easily everything they had built could be destroyed. As they both reflected on the journey they'd undertaken, they realized that while they had rid the world of Robert's tyranny, they had also been irrevocably changed. The battle was over, but the war was far from won. The scars of the past would linger, and healing would take time. Months after Robert's downfall, Paul and Linda found themselves at a crossroads. The world they had known was no longer the same. The company they had once worked so hard to build had been irreparably damaged by the fallout from Robert's reign. But they weren't ready to give up. They had fought too hard, lost too much, to simply walk away. Slowly but surely, they began the long, arduous task of rebuilding. It wasn't easy. The damage had been deep, and many of the people they had once trusted were gone, scattered by the storm that had swept through their lives. But in the midst of the destruction, something began to take root, a new beginning. They rebuilt not just their company, but their sense of purpose. The events they had endured had changed them, but they had also made them stronger. They were no longer the people they had been before, naive, trusting, unaware of the depths of the darkness that existed in the world. They had seen the worst of humanity, but they had also seen the strength of the human spirit. Together, Paul and Linda formed a new foundation, one built on honesty, integrity, and resilience. They refused to let the shadows of their past dictate their future. They began to recruit new allies, people who shared their values, their vision, and their desire for a better world. It wasn't easy, and the road ahead was long. But they knew that as long as they stayed true to their principles, they could rebuild not just their company, but the very fabric of society that had been torn apart by Robert's greed. The future wasn't certain, but for the first time in a long time, Paul and Linda felt like they had a chance to create something lasting. They were no longer fighting just for survival, they were fighting for a better world, a world where truth and justice prevailed. As Paul and Linda stood together, looking out over the skyline of their city, they knew their journey had come to an end. The battle with Robert was over, but it had led them to something greater, a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of what truly mattered. The scars they carried would never fade completely, but they had learned to live with them, to accept them as part of their story. It had been a long, difficult road, but they had emerged stronger for it. The world was different now, better, in some ways, but still imperfect. There would always be darkness, always be those who sought to exploit and manipulate, but Paul and Linda knew they had the power to fight back. They had learned that no matter how powerful or influential someone seemed, no one was untouchable. The truth always found a way to surface. In the end, it wasn't about winning or losing, it was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. It was about holding on to the belief that even in the darkest times, there was always hope. As they walked away from the ashes of their old lives, Paul and Linda felt a sense of peace settle over them. They had done what they set out to do. The rest, they realized, was out of their hands. With one final glance back, they stepped into the future, knowing that the story of their survival, their struggle, and their triumph would be told for years to come. And with that, they closed the chapter on their journey, leaving behind a legacy of hope, resilience, and the unshakable belief that no matter how dark the world may seem, the light of truth would always find a way to shine through. Thank you for following this story till the end. We hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you liked the story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories like this one. Also, make sure to hit the notification bell so you don't miss any new content. Stay tuned for more.